We would like to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The City of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3.
Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the Simpson Center in partnership with UFA and RCF. The public education series continues on agricultural policy. So today we're very excited to be talking about urban agriculture and kind of the future of farming in unfamiliar places. We have three panelists and guests that we'll be hearing from. So we're hearing from Dan Houston, Dr. Kevin Jones, and Shireen Shafee, and talking about how different cities, especially in Canada, are implementing and researching agricultural urban spaces, and as well as vertical farming and indoor farming as well. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to launch a poll question. In just a second, there it is. So the first question, and we're really interested in getting some feedback just to understand a kind of benchmark and a basis of understanding of everyone involved. So what interests you most about urban agriculture? So it could be access to natural environment, food source, raising awareness about farming in cities, ESG, or potentially something else. So I'll give you just a minute to fill out the poll, and we'll discuss a little bit about the responses before we get into our first speaker. Okay, so it seems that by far the food source and raising awareness about farming in cities are the most popular interests about urban agriculture and I guess the urbanization of agriculture. And we're about to shift now to bring it to Calgary. I'm in Calgary, downtown Calgary right now. And we're going to open with a poll. So before we move on to our next speaker, so the next question, or the next poll question is, what is the best way to utilize empty spaces in urban centers? Is it urban farming, high density housing, parking, or recreational areas? And I think this is especially relevant as we're in Calgary and there is quite a bit of empty spaces within the urban architecture. And I just wanted to give a quick reminder, if there are any questions, we will hopefully have a little bit of a discussion after all of the speakers. So you can actually ask questions in the Q&A function within Zoom. So I just wanted to give a quick reminder if there's people who have questions. So I'm seeing the results of the poll, and it seems that high density housing is the highest. About 50% of people think that that would be the best utilization of empty spaces. Second would be urban farming, and a little bit after that was recreational. No one chose parking. I guess we don't have a lot of people who are driving in the webinar, but that's perfect because now we can move into our next speaker. So Dan Houston is the president of AgriPlay Ventures, and he leads development and adoption of technology towards smart cities, and especially within smart cities, the transformation of urban spaces into potential agricultural spaces. And I think he's going to talk a little bit about Calgary specifically and how that transformation might look like in Calgary. So Dan, if you're ready.
Sorry about that. Thanks for having me on. So I'm the president of AgriPlay, which is elevated indoor farm. Kind of briefly about who we are and what we're doing. AgriPlay is a vertical farm and technology company that's dedicated to solving large-scale food insecurity issues by using underutilized commercial real estate in the urban environment. Primarily, we're focused on a number of problems that we figured a solution out to all of them. That's food security, vertical farming, scalability, which is a big one, distressed real estate markets, and agricultural data gaps, which I'm not going to talk too much about before, but if anybody's interested in the data islands that I see, happy to answer questions about that later. It starts out with the fact that I think we all realize now, thanks to COVID and long lead supply chains, that while efficient are incredibly fragile. And, you know, there's a lot of people that are saying, I mean, in a nutshell, you could be the world's greatest farmer, be intuitively connected to your plants, and still 90% of what's going to make you productive is going to be, unfortunately, largely out of your control. Climate change is not making that easier, and there's no indication that it's going to get any better. Right now, 100% of the world's agriculture, according to the UN, agricultural land and water is already being utilized and spoken for. Traditional agriculture is estimated to require 50% of all of the land and freshwater by 2050. Food security affects 30% of the world's population. Specifically here in Canada, about 1 in 8 people are food insecure. What we mean by that is effectively, if those long lean supply chains fail, then you have an issue with getting the vital nutrients that you need in your system, and those are going to fail and are failing. Alberta in general right now is about 98% food insecure. 98% of the greenhouse fruits and vegetables that we consume are imported from exterior markets, primarily Mexico, California, BC, and Ontario. So we said, okay, well, if you could do a controlled environment agriculture, you're separating the farming from the environment. You're controlling, and there's efficiencies, obviously. So obviously that's the solution. And they come in largely, well, a number of nuanced farms, but primarily container farms, large industrial farms, or what I'm calling hyper-local farms and farming initiatives in the urban environment. Each one of these needs to have a place in an ecosystem and for policy direction to solve the food insecurity problem, because it is too big for anybody to do on themselves, or any one solution to be the panacea that we're all hoping for. But largely the first two sections of container farms and industrial vertical farms, when we were reviewing it and kind of thinking like, how does this come together? Why aren't they everywhere? We realized are primarily limited to industrial space, and they suffer a large number of internal scaling issues, preventing them from being able to meet large scale demand. So kind of, I know this is going to be a little weird on the urban discussion, but I got to turn about commercial real estate. Used to be on the dark side of the force as a commercial real estate broker for downtown corporate users for 20 years almost. And Calgary is a perfect example of how this challenge is affecting the larger economy in general. Downtown vacancy is 31%, almost 32%, but realistically, that's the marketed rate. It's actually significantly more than that, but a lot of companies realize there's no value to putting their space on the market. They'll never get it covered. This is largely because Calgary used to be really good at being a high density hub for oil and gas users until the collapse of that market in October of 14. Then after that, we had COVID. And then now you've got a work from home movement that anecdotally I've already heard from previous clients of mine. And in some cases, they're anticipating that when their lease comes up within the next 2 years, they are going to be looking at cutting 70% of their office space using a work from home methodology. That's a problem if you already have 14 million square feet of office space, because that affects everything. It's not just the landlords. So there's real estate values and taxes that are received by the city that are dramatically down because they are, in Calgary specifically, assessed to the value of the building. You've got the vitality and activity, and anybody that was downtown in Calgary over COVID knows that when there is a lack of people, the wrong kind of people and activities start filling those spaces. It's a vacuum that pulls in. And it starts to become a skyrocketing problem that is difficult for anybody to kind of figure out. Debt and financing in the area for any innovative solutions disappear. In the case of Calgary right now, there isn't a landlord with vacancy over 30% that can even get any financing on their building, which is making it difficult for a lot of them to make any ends meet or for them to put any money into any initiatives. There's incentive inefficiencies within that market, and there's a loss of markets in terms of office tenants with no real way to replace them. And what I mean by that is there is a flight to quality. On the left-hand side of the picture here, you'll see a traditional office space that kind of exists, open air concept. And on the right, you'll see like a high quality space that you can get right now. The dollar signs indicate the amount of money that you need to do to give to a tenant to come into that space. On the right, that's the kind of space that people are going to right now, A-class space. To bring the whole conversation, if I can get that space for 13 years, well, I don't pay a dime for 3 years. I get all the space built out any way I want and all the free furniture to fill that space with the highest and newest technology. What could you possibly offer me in a C-class building that doesn't have any amenities on the west end of downtown? The answer is nothing. There's a serious problem, and there's no market conceivably for the next decade or more until something else transitions it. So we started putting these ideas together when my partner and I were creating the research for behind AgriPlay. We realized that the industrial focus of traditional vertical farming for industrial land was kind of the limiting factor on what made them expand, because the industrial market is only 3% of the market. And it is a tale of two cities, and Calgary is a perfect example, because by and large, simple supply and demand economics exist, where industrial in almost every single market is always the tightest market, with the smallest amount of financial incentives for people to use, the highest amount of competition, and the longest lead times for actually discovering and developing those properties. So in Calgary, if you have over 50,000 square feet that you are looking for in the industrial property, and I know I looked at just a few months ago, you can't find it. It's almost existed. You almost have to build it out. And so that's sometimes in the aggregate between 6 to 18 months to properly evaluate what you're going to be doing as a vertical farm. That involves another 8 months to figure out what the environment's going to be like, how far you're going to be expanding your product. Is this a good distribution center? And then it comes to the building, which is another 18 to 36 months. You can see that starts adding up in terms of the timelines. And then you've got a huge capital expenditure that's on top of that. Meanwhile, if you can expand to the wider market, that's 99.7% in the case of the generalized like real estate market in the US. That is the relative installation base, if you can make it flexible enough to not have those requirements. So how do we move it on? We realized there were some pretty serious issues with vertical farming technology around 3 main forms. Now, obviously, they're hugely expensive from a capital expenditure standpoint, regardless of whether or not you're talking about containerized farms or industrial farms. And again, both have a requirement in today's society to meet food insecurity, but they require too much capital. They take too much time. They're requiring a lot of power. They're form locked in terms of the technology that they use to kind of produce food, which means they're very limited to being anywhere near a building that won't accommodate those. Imagine stacking how many containers inside an industrial building. Now try and mentally imagine taking a container and putting it in an office building or retail. It becomes very difficult. And the other thing is that they require highly specialized subject matter experts, or SMEs, horticultural experts, et cetera, to kind of operate. And it functionally comes out of methodologies that I think are chronic in a number of innovative tech spaces, but primarily inside of vertical farming. There's an issue with industry's innovation fragmentation. You have widget makers, service providers, and then you have the operators. And at every level there, you have built-in inefficiencies. Widget makers are making not an ideal product, but a product that appeals to the broadest spectrum, which means you're only ever going to get incremental, iterative development that slowly progresses over time without any sharp fundamental changes, without huge risk. And they've also got a margin that they're trying to add. You've got the service providers, which are trying to aggregate all of this information and these technology solutions to provide to operators a clean methodology for operating a farm efficiently. And what you end up having is a situation where everything at every stage just starts costing more. The generalized methodology as well everybody has been focusing on the old school automation practices of refining a process to develop a product as efficiently as possible at the expense of the ability to produce anything outside of that. And that's why you have a lot of groups still progressing on that leafy greens and microgreens, because they're the easiest things to grow. And often all of the technologies that are available for the aggregators to build their own systems or subsystems for urban farming are largely required to use the technology that's available to them. A lot of people don't have the internal vertical integration that we have, as an example, to build what you need to kind of get there. So one of the reasons I want this to be really clear, and actually I'm really happy that that poll came out, was the use of urban real estate. Sometimes I love ideas, and I'm on the call here with way more smart people than myself. But when it comes to a fundamental, there are great ideas, and then there are great ideas that we need to connect to the dynamics so that we can understand what the constraints in an idea are and then address them. For example, what I've done here is I've basically addressed a single pretend building. The market dynamics in terms of the values are representative of a Calgary market and cap rate and valuation. What we're looking at, though, is if you look at a traditional office building, to acquire a tenant in a regular B-class building in this case, it might cost about $8 million for this 100,000 square foot tenant to basically build out and kit the space for what they're going to be needing. The value is not overly different. It's really depending on the term. The value is going to be up or down, but effectively $8 million spend gives you about a $20 million lift on the value of the property. Indoor farm, and again, I don't know of any other farms other than us that can actually install into other commercial real estates. So I'm using us as an example. If we install into that building, the cost of retrofit and equipment is only $13.5, but the value of the building goes up dramatically. The one that I really want us to focus though on is residential. Now, in both the first two cases, that change is not permanent. And in both those cases, they are within the regular realm of a business case. So the reason that residential conversions don't have is because largely in a lot of cases, it's $270 a square foot. You use a large number of spaces that you have to lose to common area. It can be very complicated in order to make that transition effective. And at the end of the day, the value is underwater. So in this case, and these are using metrics that I know of for actual conversions going on right now, the cost to convert the building is $27 million, but then at the end of it, value of the building is only worth 13.2. And so that's why government needs to come together to offset those differentials so that people without a revenue can at least make a decision that makes sense. If you don't have a value proposition to the city, a value proposition to the owner, and then a value proposition to the stakeholder, if you don't have all three of those, it's going to be very difficult for any of those ingenious ideas to kind of collect and actually make any sense. And so if there was anything that I could try and say that I'm a big fan of, is making solutions that are actionable and actually align to something that's long-term and valuable. And so what we built for AgriPlay is a technology system based on those requirements. So we identified what the constraints were. Instead of just trying to ignore them, we worked within them to identify that it needs to snap in and snap out. So it's just adding a use to the building rather than converting the building forever. It protects the asset by monitoring all the water. We are able to grow whatever we want. We use a power over Ethernet system that can use the power that's available for an entire office building of 30 floors, which is often equal to the power available to a 50,000 square foot industrial building, but growing on all floors, and then also using a generalized methodology to the technology development rather than a specialized technology. We created a system that can effectively grow whatever you want so that you can input into whatever localized infrastructure you need and grow around the local growing community so that you're not crushing any local growing efforts, and you're able to grow that which is food insecure within that market and grow in the aggregate to expand much faster than you could with large industrial facilities. The litmus test for us was I wanted to be able to convert 2 million square feet in LA or 3,000 square feet in Tuktoyaktuk out of a community center to make sure that those people could grow what is applicable to them, because it is amazing how many people are disconnected from their food and how food insecure they are. We are doing this right now. We are converting the Calgary Tower Center on the east, 65,000 square feet by the end of next year. We should have the rights to do the remainder of it with our rights to be about 120,000 square feet We are already in discussions. The goal is to convert 3 million square feet in Calgary by the end of 2025 and 1 million square feet in Edmonton for Alberta, and then expanding that out to other networks. That's the end of my talk, and I'm happy to answer at the end.
Thank you so much, Dan. That's really interesting that specifically in Calgary, we're going to see a transformation of the Calgary Tower, which I think is a big deal, especially because it's kind of part of the Calgary identity and what people associate with the Calgary as a city and the Calgary skyline. So that will be really interesting to see unfold. We actually have another poll, it's going to be the same question as the previous one, just to see if we were able to change people's minds with the presentation. So again, what is the best way to utilize empty spaces in urban centers? Is it urban farming, high density housing, parking, or recreational areas? So I'll just give a minute before we move on to our introducing our next speaker. So we have our results, and it seems that the trend is about the same. I guess that there is a little bit of a pinch, especially in housing. And I think that we have some people that are participating in the webinar who are from different parts of Canada, where I guess housing prices are especially expensive and are especially a barrier in terms of cost of living, which is perfect because that'll bring us to our next speaker. So our next speaker is Shireen Shafi. She is coming from Toronto. So talk about high cost of living and the cost of living in the city. She is from the Toronto Metropolitan University, where she's a research associate in the urban garden within the city. And she's going to give us a little bit of a case study and talk about what that looks like in Toronto in terms of community gardening and specifically rooftop gardens. So Shireen, whenever you're ready.
Hello, everyone. Very glad to be participating in this conversation today. It's cool, the breadth of perspectives we have. Yeah, it really helps to kind of paint the picture, and I'm looking forward to the conversation we'll have. But yeah, I'm Shireen. I'm the research coordinator with the Urban Farm, and I'd like to share with you a little bit about who we are and what we do. I should say that the institution that I work for recently went through a name change. So some of you may have formerly been familiar with Ryerson University. We are now called Toronto Metropolitan University. So that takes some getting used to. But I just wanted to explain that because you'll see that in our website and things. But yeah, I'm thrilled to be able to speak to you today about the 2 rooftop farms we operate right in the heart of downtown Toronto. And before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you today from the Dish with One Spoon territory. So I think it's interesting to speak about how the urban farm at Toronto Metropolitan University came to be. So please allow me to take you on this journey. So it was in 2004 that the university got its first green roof, and it's on the newly constructed, or newly at the time, newly constructed engineering building. So that was in 2004. And it was in 2005 that an architecture professor at TMU became a principal investigator for a report that initiated the City of Toronto to propose a green roof bylaw. So you guys may not know this, but in 2009, Toronto became the first city in all of North America to pass green roof legislation, which dictates that buildings over 2,000 square meters must include a green roof on them. And now, more than a decade later, the city is now home to more than 700 green roofs, which is pretty cool. So going back to kind of the story on campus, it was in 2010 when some students got together with a desire to grow food on campus. They approached the university's facilities department, who granted them access to space at the ground level. And this group of nutrition students, they did such a good job to manage these spaces and to grow food in these spaces that facilities suggested they might be interested in growing food up on the green roof. So this was in 2013, almost a decade after the green roof was originally built. So in 2013, they did a pilot on the roof to try their hand at food growing up there. And it was so successful that the rest of the green roof was converted into a rooftop farm in the following year. So this green roof was particularly suited as a site for crop production, since it actually had a greater planting depth than what you'll find on most green roofs today. So I'll talk a little bit more about green roofs, but we make beds and have about a foot of planting depth. So we were pretty lucky to have that, as it really lets us grow a great variety of crops up there. And so today we're very happy to be supported by the university. As a department, we are really woven into the institutional landscape along with other services such as the bookstore and parking and other food retailers on campus. And it's just really exciting to think that we can be a department in a university just like all of the other necessary departments. So green roof technology, we might not all be familiar with what I'm talking about when I say that. But this is a diagram that one of our students made, kind of detailing the layers of green roof technology. So A to E are kind of the most important components. So growing media is number one. That's really what we use as our soil, and it makes us very different than, a ground level farm. But so growing medium, or an engineered soil blend, and then there's filter fabric and a drainage layer and insulation and a root barrier. And these are all of the components that make up a green roof, or the basis of our rooftop farm. So this is an aerial view of what the original urban farm rooftop looks like, which I mentioned was constructed as a green roof in 2004 and was retrofitted almost a decade later. To accommodate a 1/4 acre farm. So we have about a 1/4 acre of growing space up here. So you can see our 4-plot market garden in plots A through D. And then also you can see to the right, our Indigenous Foodways plot. So this was the first plot where the Indigenous Foodways Initiative kind of was planted. And it's cool because that was also the spot where the rooftop growing was piloted in 2013. So this is the plot where kind of everything begins, which is pretty neat. And we're also very excited to be launching our new rooftop farm space. And this is actually the first rooftop farm to be constructed as a result of the green roof legislation that I was speaking about earlier. So that's exciting. And so not only does this space feature a 140 person gathering space, it also features our very own greenhouse, which we've never had before. And it is also home to the Urban Farms Food Sovereignty Initiatives. So I refer to our Indigenous-led initiative, but we have both our Black-led initiative, both of those initiatives up there. And it's been really cool to see both of these initiatives bloom. And so, yeah, we are an ecological farm. So people might not really know what that means, but there are 3 kind of primary things that I mean when I say this. So this means that we don't use any artificial chemical pesticides or fertilizers. This means that nurturing the soil, or our soil blend, is the #1 most important thing that we do. And we do this in a variety of ways, but really keeping the soil covered and disrupting the soil as little as possible are very, very critical part of what we do or don't do. And this means that we do our best to work in harmony with nature, with the wild plants and the pollinators in order to promote biodiversity. And so what this looks like in practice, some of our production methods, we have a 4-year crop rotation that we do. So we cycle plant families around the farm, and this is an ecological pest and disease mitigation strategy. We also use cover crops and green manure. Winter rye is our best friend. So that's a cover crop that we plant in the fall, and it stays really hardy through the winter and then grows again in the spring, which is great at protecting our soil through the winter. We use compost and natural amendments. We use things like chicken manure and feather meal and compost tea, which don't smell great, but they work well. We use drip irrigation because it's pretty efficient method of irrigating, because you get the least amount of water loss because this water gets applied directly to the soil. And we use no-till methods. So we try to disturb the soil as little as possible, as I mentioned, which is a very different approach compared to that of large-scale industrial farming. We use biointensive spacing, meaning plants are planted very close together, and this helps also to cover the soil and to produce greater yields. We use plant positive strategies versus pest negative strategies. So what this means is we do everything we can to foster the natural resistance of plants because they have that. So we really just try to build the health of the plant so that they can be more tolerant to pest and disease. And we support biodiversity. So we do this by growing a diversity of crops, but also by letting certain weeds grow and prosper. For instance, milkweed is the only habitat, the only place where the monarch butterfly can lay their eggs. You guys have probably heard that monarch butterflies just recently made it onto the endangered list. And so we're very happy to be able to provide this habitat, provide the milkweed, let the milkweed prosper so that we can support the monarch butterfly population. And then lastly, we minimize the use of plastics whenever and wherever we can. So these are some of the kind of crops that we grow. People love to ask us, oh, you're on a rooftop farm, what can you grow? We can pretty much grow everything and anything, which is so excited to see. Our joy this year was growing watermelon and sharing watermelon with our participants who came up to the roof. But yeah, these are some of the kinds of crops that we grow. We do focus on growing high yielding or quick succession crops. Most importantly, we grow things that people will use in their kitchens week to week, because we want to make sure that we're growing stuff that our community wants. So yeah, to give you an idea of the breadth of what we produce, we grow 30 to 50 different crops per year and more than 100 different cultivars. And we distribute our produce with using a model of thirds approach. So what this looks like is a third of our produce is sold at market rate. And so we sell to chefs on campus. We sell through a weekly garden grab bag and through a farmer's market on Mondays. And so we have this kind of the highest tier, which is we're selling produce at market rate. And then we have 1/3 that is sold at an equitable or subsidized rate. So really that's to students, where we offer a reduced price at the farmer's market. We offer a reduced price for the garden grab bags. And then our final third, we are able to donate, a third of our produce through some of our community partners, which is an amazing thing that we're able to do. Not every urban farm, rooftop farm in general is able to do this kind of thing, but because we are supported by the university, we are able to give back in this way, which is just so excellent because we are situated in a neighborhood that has such great need. Engaging the community is another super important part of what we do, and we do this in a myriad of ways. Like we've hosted a community town hall where we invite participants to provide their input about kind of the direction of the urban farm and what we offer. We host a variety of workshops, tours, volunteer sessions, field walks, and also the urban farm has offered a training program in the past that we're planning to bring back in the next couple years. I'm actually a graduate of that program. Okay, this is one of the things that I love to talk about the most, and it's about the range of benefits that a rooftop farm can offer. Some of them are more obvious when people think about a green roof or a rooftop farm. They think about stormwater management. They think about reduced food miles, maybe reducing urban heat island effect, as these are becoming kind of growing challenges. Also providing insulation on the building or for the building to lessen energy demands. There are truly so many ecosystem services provided by a rooftop farm, and some of these are harder to quantify, such as the ability to serve as a space for community cohesion, bringing people together around food growing, creating a habitat and supporting biodiversity, not to mention the mental health benefits that are gained through connecting with nature at a time when, mental health is, or kind of mental health crisis is on the rise. So yeah, I'm really a big believer in the work that we do, and the Urban Farm is committed to supporting research to better understand and quantify these benefits in order to communicate the true value of these kinds of rooftop farming spaces. We also hope to inform policy development and are also interested in the creation of a guideline so we can see this model more prevalently adopted. So research is my primary area of focus on the farm. While I do have my hand in everything else, I'd like to speak to you a little bit about the Urban Farm Living Lab. So the Urban Farm established itself as a living lab in 2019 in order to bring together urban farmers, community partners, and academics through interdisciplinary research. So the Living Lab builds on user-driven research needs that responds to the challenges of designing and operating a rooftop farm using green roof technology. So some of the research projects we've supported in the past have to do with monitoring of some different benefits of the rooftop farm, as I had just suggested. And in particular, we had a PhD student last year who was looking at comparing the ability of a rooftop farm to manage stormwater and mitigate urban heat island effect compared to a conventional roof and compared to like a conventional green roof, because as I mentioned, most green roofs don't have as great a planting depth as the one that we are situated on. And so this research showed us that 88% of the stormwater was retained on site at the rooftop farm. And peak delay reached up to 8 hours, which, speaking to this researcher, is huge. It's a very big difference than what a conventional green roof offers. And so this greatly reduces the demand on municipal sewer systems, ultimately helping to keep sewage out of our local water bodies, which is, obviously very important. So it's this real kind of, real world evaluation that is necessary to determine the true value of rooftop farming so that we can support the development of more rooftop farms in Toronto and beyond. And we hope to support more valuable research such as this in the years to come. So if you are a researcher interested in conducting research to do with rooftop farming, please be sure to get in touch with me to learn about the research opportunities at the Urban Farm at TMU. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shireen. Thanks so much. It's been really interesting seeing the community garden and urban agriculture and all these different words that and how they're applied, as we've seen in Edmonton, and how it's being applied in Calgary, and now we're seeing how it's being applied in Toronto. It's really cool seeing how it changes, and it's really different across Canada. So we have one last poll question to again kind of gauge what you've learned as a participant in this webinar. So based on what you've heard, what are the most promising aspects of urban agriculture? So you can pick food security, kind of the development of cosmetics and botanicals in terms of small batch gardening, raising awareness about farming in cities. So that's more so the citizen engagement, the use of underutilized urban spaces, or the application of innovative technology in agriculture. So I'll give a minute just to answer, and we can see what the results are. Okay, so I'm seeing that it's mostly about food security, and as we've seen that there are a lot of options in terms of in terms of food options and what we can grow as crops through urban agriculture, as well as I'm seeing application of innovation technology in agriculture, as well as the use of underutilized spaces, and finally raising awareness about farming in cities. So we only have about 5 minutes left in terms of discussion. And I saw that there were some Q&A questions, which Dan took the time to answer within the Q&A box. But just as a really quick discussion that maybe the three panelists can speak to, we talk about community gardening and urban agriculture in, as I said, Edmonton, Alberta, and Toronto. So just as an understanding, are you working more so, we talked about investment and the importance of governance and policy in these different cities. So working in these cities, are we looking at municipal government or provincial government, or is it support from the federal government? So maybe Dan or Shireen or Kevin, you can start talking about your experience in Edmonton, and perhaps we can move to Shireen or Dan after.
I'm happy to jump in, Elena, if I can.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of where the support comes from, I think we're missing some really easy wins at the municipal level when we're talking about this in terms of planning. We've heard some tremendous projects, but there's really easy ways to do urban agriculture. In Edmonton, we have extremely low density. We have a lot of badly used green spaces and a lot of badly used urban spaces. So those should be made accessible for communities to lead visions of what they want urban agriculture to do. So it's great to have a green roof, and it's great to think about vertical gardening. The millions of dollars in investment there, the granting programs, the ability to do that, the technologies are all great to do, but we've got some really easier wins, surplus school sites, those things. The second point is it's a policy not just about opening up space, but it's about ensuring access of communities to food growing spaces. We know that in order to create food justice, food security, and food sustainability, that we must ensure communities have access to green spaces and food growing spaces. And if our sustainability policies are filling in those spaces, preventing access to those spaces, gentrifying communities, then we have to say, okay, are we really achieving what we want to do here? So I think municipal government has a real role here in doing good planning, ensuring those spaces for community, and being cautious about the things that they're doing, which are gentrifying and pushing people further and further away from those food justice spaces.
Perfect. I don't know if Shireen or Dan, if you want to jump in to give a little bit of perspective from Toronto or from Calgary. Maybe, yeah,
So I'm just so snaps for what Kevin was saying. I don't want to say anything, but yeah, I think, well, okay, so I have a certain context on my brain because I was participating in a talk yesterday, a binational talk between Toronto and Narima, Japan, and they have like a person within their government who is dedicated to urban agriculture. They have 40% of their land within this neighborhood, the suburb of Tokyo, that is agriculture land. And you know, it's surrounded, these farmlands are surrounded by residential neighborhoods where families are able to have plots within this farm and farm for themselves, and there's teaching and there's resources available, and there is funding available for these farm operators. So I'm looking to that kind of model, and I'm seeing, you know, like it's just so great that it just seems that kind of Toronto is or Canada is lacking some of these kinds of obvious supports, as Kevin's saying. There's some low-hanging fruit, so let's just start there.
Thank you, Shireen. That's really interesting that, you know, in Tokyo it's so different, so similar and yet so different. We have so much to learn. Dan, if you want to provide some final comments.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have had a tremendously positive experience with both Calgary Economic Development and the City of Calgary. They, I mean, they're in a different mindset though, because they've been trying to adjust for the effective decimation of the oil and gas sector for a while. So, you know, necessity is the mother of all inventions. So they started reinventing what their policies and procedures were going to be. So for urban agriculture, they actually provided the zoning. They opened the zoning books on almost all the commercial buildings in the downtown core to make it very easy. I think to get the zoning took me literally 3 days for the Calgary Tower. And then they've got a very streamlined now process, which used to be weeks and is now just a few, months, and now it's just a few weeks to identify any issues that they would have while they're building the box that they can put stuff in. So they've actually been very innovative on that and super supportive. So, I think they understand that it's one piece to the puzzle. I mean, with that comes a large number of new innovative industries and then subsets of skills that are going to be developed throughout that process. I just think it's a positive thing for everybody in Canada, but yeah, government needs to be much more positive on developing it. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm seeing the time. We went a minute over. I hope everyone is okay with that. Thank you so much to everyone for participating, and especially to our panelists, so Shireen, Dan, and Kevin. And hopefully we see everyone in the next webinar. Thank you again on behalf of the Simpson Center and on behalf of UFA and RCF. And we'll see you in the next one. Thanks, everyone. Bye.